Lieutenant Marcus Washington sits in his car, blood soaking through his uniform as sirens wail in the distance. Officer Blake Reynolds stands frozen, gun still smoking, as recognition dawns on his face. The decorated Black Army officer he just shot during a routine traffic stop isn't the dangerous suspect he claimed to see. As Marcus's vision blurs, he thinks about his wife and daughter waiting at home for the celebration dinner he'll never attend. The body cam footage would later reveal the truth, but by then, what justice could possibly repair such a devastating mistake? If you believe in equality and justice for all Americans, regardless of skin color, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow's special episode reveals how systematic discrimination tears communities apart and the brave individuals fighting back against it. Lieutenant Marcus Washington drove his new black SUV down the familiar streets of Riverview, excitement building in his chest. After 3 grueling tours in Afghanistan, he was finally home for good. The suburban landscape had changed little since his childhood, but Marcus himself had transformed from a wide-eyed local boy to a decorated army officer with medals for valor and leadership. His uniform was pressed perfectly for the surprise homecoming he had planned for his wife, Ayana, and their 8-year-old daughter, Zora. Marcus smiled as he passed the old community center where he had spent his youth, making a mental note to visit his mentor Samuel Thompson there tomorrow. For now, though, his thoughts were consumed by the image of his family's faces when they saw him walk through the door weeks earlier than expected. He checked the rearview mirror, adjusting his captain's hat and rehearsing the speech he had prepared for Zora's class career day next week. The flashing blue lights in his mirror caught him by surprise. Marcus checked his speedometer 5 miles, under the limit, and ran through a mental checklist of potential issues with the vehicle. Nothing came to mind. With military precision, he signaled and pulled to the curb, placing both hands visibly on the steering wheel, as he had been taught to do as a young black man in America, long before his military training. Officer Blake Reynolds approached slowly, hand resting on his holstered weapon. Marcus noticed immediately how the officer's posture shifted when he registered the vehicle's expensive model and its black driver. "License and registration," Reynolds demanded without preamble, his voice carrying an edge of suspicion. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus replied calmly, maintaining eye contact through the side mirror. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" "Broken taillight," Reynolds replied curtly. Though Marcus knew this was false, he had personally checked the vehicle thoroughly before leaving the base. "License and registration, now." "I understand, sir. I'm going to reach for my wallet slowly," Marcus explained, his military training kicking in as he narrated his movements. "I'm Lieutenant Marcus Washington, U.S. Army, just returned from deployment." Reynolds' hand moved to his weapon. "I didn't ask for your life story. Keep your hands where I can see them." The conflicting commands created an impossible situation. Marcus took a slow breath. "Officer, I'm trying to comply with your request for identification, but I need to reach for my wallet. I'm moving very slowly." As Marcus's hand moved toward his pocket, Reynolds drew his weapon in one fluid motion. "Hands up, now, out of the vehicle." The situation escalated rapidly as Reynolds shouted increasingly contradictory commands. "Exit the vehicle, keep your hands up, don't move." Marcus maintained his composure, even as the officer's voice grew more agitated, more dangerous. "Sir, I'm a military officer just trying to get home to my family," Marcus explained, his voice steady despite the gun pointed at his chest. "Please lower your weapon so we can resolve this professionally." Reynolds grabbed the door handle, yanking it open. "Out, on the ground, now!" Marcus complied methodically, maintaining his dignity even as he was forced to lie face down on the asphalt, his pristine uniform collecting road grime. Reynolds pressed a knee into his back, reaching for handcuffs. The wail of another siren approached, and a second patrol car pulled up. Officer Garcia, a veteran officer, stepped out and immediately recognized the prone man in uniform. "Reynolds!" "Stand down," Garcia commanded, quickly approaching. "That's Lieutenant Washington. His brother and I went to high school together." The pressure on Marcus's back vanished as Reynolds reluctantly backed away. Garcia helped Marcus to his feet, brushing off his uniform apologetically. "Lieutenant Washington, I'm so sorry about this misunderstanding," Garcia said, shooting a warning glance at his colleague. "Welcome home, sir. Thank you for your service." Marcus straightened his uniform, his face a careful mask hiding the humiliation and anger beneath. "Thank you, Officer Garcia. I understand these things happen." But they both knew this wasn't true. These things happened systematically, repeatedly to people who looked like Marcus, regardless of their uniform or status. As Marcus drove away, he debated filing a formal complaint. The incident replayed in his mind, each moment burning with injustice. But the thought of Ayana and Zora waiting at home, the celebration he had planned, made him push it aside for now. He wouldn't let this incident taint his homecoming. Tomorrow would be soon enough to address the deeper problems in his hometown. For tonight, he just wanted to hold his family. The reunion with his family unfolded even better than Marcus had imagined. When he walked through the door of their modest two-story home, Ayana froze mid-sentence, coffee mug slipping from her fingers and shattering on the kitchen floor. Zora screamed with pure joy, launching herself across the room and into his arms with such force that Marcus staggered backward. "Daddy! Daddy! You're home early!" Zora cried, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck as if she feared he might disappear again. Ayana approached more slowly, tears streaming down her beautiful face. "Marcus, we weren't expecting you for another 3 weeks," she whispered, touching his face as if to confirm he was real. Surprise, Marcus grinned, pulling her into the embrace with their daughter. For several minutes they simply held each other, making up for 15 months of separation in a single, perfect moment. After the initial shock wore off, they talked excitedly about plans for his homecoming celebration. Ayana had already scheduled a family gathering for his official return date, but Marcus suggested they keep his early arrival a secret and surprise everyone. "First, though," he said, "I want to take my 2 favorite women shopping. I've got presents from abroad, but I also want to buy something special right here in Riverview." At Kingsley's, the upscale department store downtown, Marcus noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere as they entered. Security guards made little effort to disguise their surveillance, following at a not quite discreet distance as the family browsed. "Let's split up," Marcus suggested. "I want to find something special for each of you." While Ayana and Zora headed to the children's department, Marcus wandered to the jewelry section, examining watches. A particular titanium chronograph caught his eye, similar to one his commanding officer wore, but with sleeker lines. "May I try this on?" he asked the associate behind the counter, who hesitated briefly before retrieving the watch, as Marcus fastened it around his wrist, admiring the craftsmanship. A security guard approached, followed by the floor manager. "Sir, is there a problem here?" the manager asked, his tone suggesting Marcus was the problem. "No problem at all," Marcus replied pleasantly. "Just trying on this watch." The manager's eyes narrowed. "That's a $4,000 timepiece. Perhaps I can show you something more appropriate." The implication hung in the air between them, unmistakable and ugly. Before Marcus could respond, the security guard moved closer. "Sir, we're going to need you to return the watch immediately," the guard stated firmly. "Of course," Marcus complied, carefully removing it. "I was planning to purchase it, actually." "It's quite impressive," the manager scoffed. "Purchase it with what exactly?" "With my credit card," Marcus replied evenly, though his pulse quickened with indignation. "Is there a reason I shouldn't be able to?" "Sir, we've had a series of thefts recently," the manager explained without actually explaining anything. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the security office." "On what grounds?" Marcus demanded, his military bearing straightening his spine. "The watch appears to have been damaged while in your possession," the manager claimed. Though Marcus knew this was false, a small crowd had gathered now, other shoppers watching the confrontation with expressions ranging from confusion to smug satisfaction. Among them, Marcus spotted Zora, her young face crumpling with confusion and distress as she watched her father being treated like a criminal. Before the situation could escalate further, Ayana pushed through the onlookers, receipt in hand. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone professional but cold. As a head nurse at Riverview Memorial, Ayana had perfected the art of commanding respect with just her voice. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern the manager began. "I'm his wife," Ayana interrupted. "And I believe it does concern me when my husband is being harassed while shopping for a gift that I've already paid for." She held up the receipt. Dated 20 minutes earlier, she had purchased the watch while Marcus was looking at other items, intending it as a surprise. The manager's face flushed as he examined the receipt. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." "No," Marcus corrected quietly, aware of his daughter watching. "There was no misunderstanding. There was an assumption made based on the color of my skin." The manager stammered an apology that contained no actual admission of wrongdoing, offered a store discount that the Washingtons refused, and retreated quickly. Later, at the restaurant where they had planned a celebratory dinner, Zora picked at her food, uncharacteristically quiet. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Marcus asked gently. "Not hungry after all that ice cream?" Zora looked up, her eyes troubled beyond her years. "Daddy, why did those men think you were stealing? You're a soldier. Soldiers are heroes." The innocent question struck Marcus like a physical blow. He exchanged a glance with Ayana, seeing his own pain reflected in her eyes. "How did you explain systemic racism to an 8-year-old who still believed in the fundamental fairness of the world?" "Sometimes, Zora," he began carefully, "people make wrong judgments about others based on how they look, not who they are." "Because you're black?" Zora asked directly, showing a perception that broke her parents' hearts. "Yes, baby," Ayana confirmed softly, "but that's their mistake, not ours, never ours." The celebration dinner Marcus had dreamed about during lonely nights in Afghanistan had been tainted, transformed into a painful teaching moment for his daughter. As they drove home in silence, Marcus found himself wondering if returning to Riverview had been the right decision after all. Comment number 1. If you've ever experienced or witnessed racial profiling in a store, the pain in Zora's eyes as she watched her hero father being treated like a criminal is something no child should experience. Like this video if you believe every person deserves to be judged by their character, not their skin color. Subscribe for more stories that expose the reality of racial injustice in America. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have confronted the store management more directly or stayed calm for your child's sake as he did? The morning after the department store incident, Marcus drove to the Riverview Community Center. The 2-story brick building had been a sanctuary during his own youth, a place where children from the predominantly black east side of town could find mentorship, educational support, and a safe haven from the streets. Now as an adult, Marcus volunteered there whenever he was home on leave. Believing strongly in giving back to the community that had shaped him, Samuel Thompson, the center's director for over 30 years, embraced Marcus warmly. "The prodigal. Son returns," he boomed, his face creasing with genuine joy. At 67, Samuel moved more slowly than he once had, but his voice still carried the same authority that had kept generations of Riverview youth on the straight and narrow. "It's good to be home, Mr. Thompson," Marcus replied, falling naturally into the respectful address he had used since childhood, despite Samuel's frequent insistence that he call him by his first name. They walked through the center, Marcus noting new computer equipment in the study room and fresh paint in the gymnasium. "The place looks good," he observed. Samuel's expression tightened slightly. "We do what we can with what we have. Funding's been cut again since Chief Crawford took over the police department and started whispering in the mayor's ear about misallocation of community resources." "Crawford?" Marcus asked. "Don't think I know him." "Transferred in from Birmingham about 2 years ago. Old-school type who believes in proactive policing, which seems to mean stopping every black man under 40. Samuel sighed heavily. "Harassment complaints. Up 300%. But the town council looks the other way because reported crime statistics are down." "They're down because people have stopped reporting," Marcus guessed, familiar with the pattern from other communities. "Exactly. Speaking of which, how's your first day back been? Any unwelcome encounters with Riverview's finest yet?" Marcus hesitated, then related both the traffic stop and the department store incident. Samuel listened gravely, unsurprised. "That'll be Officer Reynolds who pulled you over. He's Crawford's golden boy, leads the department in citations and arrests, particularly in our neighborhoods." Samuel shook his head. What about the store incident? You filing a complaint? Haven't decided, Marcus admitted. Not sure it would accomplish anything besides putting a target on my back. Well, think about it. We've been documenting incidents, building a case. Samuel changed the subject. Now, about Saturday's youth leadership event. Still willing to speak to the kids about your military experience? Absolutely, Marcus agreed. These kids need to see that there are paths out of Riverview, options beyond what they see day to day. They spent the next hour planning the event, discussing which aspects of military service would most resonate with teenagers facing limited opportunities and systemic barriers. The conversation flowed easily, weighted with purpose but lightened by their genuine connection. The next morning, Marcus received an urgent call from Samuel. Someone broke into the center last night, the older man reported, his voice strained. You better come see this. When Marcus arrived, he found Samuel standing in the main hallway, surrounded by destruction. Spray-painted racial slurs covered the walls, computers had been smashed, furniture overturned, and worst of all, the wall of achievement photographs of community center alumni who had gone on to college and successful careers had been defaced with particularly vile language. Have the police been called? Marcus asked, surveying the damage with mounting anger. They're here now, Samuel replied grimly. Out back. In the parking lot, Marcus found 2 patrol cars. Officer Reynolds was among the responding officers, taking notes with visible disinterest as the center's assistant director described the break-in. When Reynolds spotted Marcus, a flicker of recognition crossed his face, quickly replaced by a neutral expression. Lieutenant Washington, he acknowledged, stiffly. I understand you're connected with this establishment. I grew up here, Marcus replied evenly. Any leads on who might have done this? Reynolds shrugged. Probably gang activity. This area has had problems with the East Side crew claiming territory. Marcus knew this was nonsense. The East Side crew was a handful of teenage boys who occasionally tagged buildings with graffiti. Not an organized gang that would commit this level of targeted vandalism. This wasn't gang-related, Marcus stated firmly. The language used, the specific targeting of the achievement wall, this was racially motivated. We'll look into all possibilities, Reynolds responded dismissively. But without security cameras, there's not much to go on. We had cameras, Samuel interjected. The footage was stored on the computers that were destroyed. Reynolds made a note without comment, his body language clearly communicating that he considered the case already closed. As the police departed with minimal evidence collection and no promise of meaningful investigation, Marcus surveyed the destruction. Again, his military mind already formulating a response plan. The event is tomorrow, Samuel said quietly. We should probably cancel. No, Marcus decided. We're not letting them win. Call every volunteer on your list. I'll reach out to my military buddies in the area. We're going to have this place clean and ready by tomorrow morning. What followed was a testament to community solidarity. Word spread rapidly, and by noon, more than 50 volunteers had arrived to help clean, paint, and repair. Marcus organized, then with military efficiency, assigning teams to specific tasks and establishing a supply chain for needed materials. Several local businesses, hearing of the vandalism, donated replacements for the destroyed equipment. By evening, the slurs had been painted over, the furniture repaired or replaced, and the achievement wall restored with newly printed photographs. The center looked better than it had before the attack. The next day, the youth leadership event proceeded as planned. Marcus, in full dress uniform, spoke powerfully about overcoming adversity, about serving a country that hadn't always served its black citizens equally. The room was packed beyond capacity, with many community members attending specifically, to show solidarity after the vandalism. Local media covered both the vandalism and the community response, with the Riverview Gazette running a front-page story featuring a photograph of Marcus, standing proudly with a group of teenage boys and girls in front of the restored achievement wall. From his patrol car parked across the street, Officer Reynolds watched the crowd dispersing after the successful event, his expression dark with displeasure as he observed the positive coverage and community unity that had emerged from what should have been a demoralizing attack. 3 days after the community center event, Marcus found an envelope in his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a computer-printed note that read simply, "Heroes should know their place. Riverview doesn't need your kind of help." Marcus didn't mention it to Ayanna, not wanting to worry her. Instead, he drove to the police station to file a report, only to find himself face-to-face with Officer Reynolds at the front desk. "I need to report a threatening message," Marcus stated professionally, sliding the note and envelope across the counter. Reynolds barely glanced at it. "Not much of a threat, Lieutenant. More like an opinion." "An opinion delivered anonymously." "To my home," Marcus pointed out, "following vandalism at the community center where I recently spoke." Reynolds sighed with exaggerated patience. "I'll have Officer Garcia take your report. She handles community relations." The dismissive tone was unmistakable. Officer Garcia, a Latina woman in her 30s, approached with a more professional demeanor. "Lieutenant Washington, let's talk in the interview room." Once seated in the small room, Garcia's expression softened slightly. "Off the record, I want to apologize for your reception. Not all of us share certain perspectives." "I appreciate that," Marcus replied, "but I'm more concerned about potential escalation. This note came to my home address, which isn't public information." Garcia nodded, taking the threat more seriously than her colleague had. "I'll file this properly, but—" She hesitated. "You should know there are limitations to what I can do. Department politics," she added quietly. "Chief Crawford sets certain priorities. And investigating threats against black community leaders isn't one of them?" Marcus asked directly. Garcia's silence was answer enough. That night, as the family sat down to dinner, the sound of screeching tires followed by a loud crash brought Marcus rushing to the window. Outside, a vehicle had swerved deliberately into their mailbox before speeding away. Though no one was hurt, the message was clear. The threats were escalating from words to actions. When the police arrived, it was Reynolds again, accompanied by a younger officer who took notes but asked few questions. "Probably teenagers joyriding," Reynolds suggested, though the precision of the hit indicated otherwise. "We'll check for any security cameras in the area." The next day, when Marcus followed up, Garcia informed him apologetically that the security footage from neighboring houses had been mysteriously corrupted and was unusable. Taking matters into his own hands, Marcus installed a comprehensive security system around his home, complete with cameras, motion sensors, and direct alerts to his phone. He also began methodically documenting every incident, building a case that individual officers might dismiss, but that higher authorities could not ignore. Ayanna found him at the kitchen table late one night, reviewing the security footage. "Is this how it's going to be?" she asked softly, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Looking over our shoulders, jumping at every sound." Marcus covered her hand with his. "It's just temporary, until I figure out who's behind this." "Maybe we should consider leaving," Ayanna suggested hesitantly. "Moving somewhere else. You could find work anywhere with your qualifications." The Itoic suggestion hung in the air between them, reasonable yet painful. Marcus had returned to Riverview not just for nostalgia, but with purpose. This was his home, his community. "Running won't solve the problem," he finally said. "It just leaves it for someone else to face." Before Ayanna could respond, Marcus's phone chimed with a notification from a private message board for veterans. It was from Michael Jenkins, another black veteran who had returned to Riverview the previous year. "Need to talk, not over the phone. Meet at Veterans Park tomorrow." The message raised Marcus's concerns. Jenkins had been a year ahead of him in high school, had served in the Marines, and had returned to work at his family's auto repair shop. The next day, at the designated meeting spot, Marcus found not just Jenkins, but 3 other black veterans from Riverview. The pattern of harassment they described matched Marcus's experiences. Traffic stops for non-existent violations, anonymous threats, vandalism dismissed as random crime. "It started after I spoke at the high school career day," Jenkins explained. "Told the kids they could aspire to more than what society expected of them. Next day, police were at my shop claiming anonymous tips about stolen parts. Another veteran, former Air Force Technical Sergeant Darius Wilson, described being followed by patrol cars whenever he drove through certain neighborhoods. My white neighbors throw loud parties every weekend, but when my son had his graduation celebration, we got 3 noise complaints in an hour. As they shared their experiences, a pattern emerged. Any black resident who gained prominence, spoke publicly, or challenged the status quo became a target. The harassment wasn't random, it was systematic. "We need to document everything," Marcus told the group. "Build a case that can't be ignored or dismissed." "Already tried that route," Wilson replied grimly. "Filed complaints with internal affairs. Nothing happened except more harassment." "Then we go higher," Marcus insisted. "State authorities, federal if necessary. But first, we need irrefutable evidence." As the men parted ways, they agreed to form a support network, sharing information, and standing witness for each other when needed. Marcus felt simultaneously encouraged by the alliance and disturbed by its necessity. That evening, as he helped Zora with her homework, his phone alerted him to motion at the front gate. The security camera showed a police cruiser parked directly in front of his house. It remained there for exactly 30 minutes before driving, away only to return 2 hours later. No official reason, no interaction, just presence as intimidation. "Daddy, why do the police keep coming to our house?" Zora asked, her voice small. "Are we in trouble?" Marcus pulled his daughter close. "No, Princess, we haven't done anything wrong. Sometimes people in power don't like it when others stand up for what's right." "Is that why those people were mean to you at the store? And why someone broke our mailbox?" Marcus realized his daughter was connecting dots he'd hoped to keep separate from her young mind. The innocence he'd fought to protect overseas was being eroded here at home by the very institutions sworn to protect it. "Some people are afraid of change," he explained carefully. "And sometimes that fear makes them do unkind things." "Are you afraid, Daddy?" Marcus smiled gently. "Not of them, no. I'm only afraid of not being the father and man I need to be." That night, after Zora was asleep, Marcus received an unexpected text from Officer Garcia. "Be careful who you trust. Eyes and ears everywhere. Some of us want to help." The cryptic warning confirmed what Marcus had begun to suspect. The harassment wasn't just the action of a few prejudiced officers. It was something more organized, more insidious. And somewhere within the system, there were allies waiting to be found. Have you ever stood up for what's right even when it made you a target? Comment number 1 if you believe systemic discrimination requires collective action to overcome. Like this video if you think more people should document and report discrimination like Marcus is doing. Subscribe to follow more stories of courage in the face of injustice. The question remains, when the system itself is corrupt, where can Marcus turn for justice? And what price will his family pay as the threats continue to escalate? The following week, Marcus maintained his routine while remaining vigilant. He continued his morning runs, participated in community events, and spent quality time with his family, refusing to let intimidation tactics disrupt his life. But beneath this normalcy, he was building his case methodically, documenting each incident of surveillance and harassment. He had begun researching civil rights attorneys who specialized in police misconduct cases, knowing the path ahead would require legal expertise. After dropping Zora at school one morning, Marcus stopped at a local coffee shop. As he waited for his order, a young Hispanic officer in uniform entered. Marcus recognized him as Officer Ramirez, one of the newer additions to the Riverview Police Department, the officer ordered, then casually positioned himself next to Marcus. "Beautiful day," Ramirez commented, his voice low, despite the casual words. "Especially at Johnson Park around 7 tonight, northeast corner by the old oak tree. Come alone." Before Marcus could respond, Ramirez collected his coffee and left without another glance. The encounter was brief enough to seem coincidental to any observers, but left Marcus intrigued and cautious. His military training made him wary of potential traps, but his instincts told him this might be the inside connection he needed. That evening, after telling Ayana he was meeting with other veterans, Marcus drove to Johnson Park, taking a circuitous route to ensure he wasn't followed. He parked several blocks away and approached the meeting point on foot, scanning for any signs of an ambush. Officer Ramirez was already there, dressed in civilian clothes and visibly nervous. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said without preamble as Marcus approached. "If they find out, my career is over. Probably more than that." "Why are you taking the risk?" Marcus asked, maintaining a safe distance. "Because what's happening in this department is wrong," Ramirez replied simply. "I became a cop to protect communities, not terrorize them." Over the next hour, Ramirez revealed what Marcus had suspected but couldn't prove. There was an unofficial directive within the Riverview Police Department targeting what Chief Crawford called uppity black residents successful individuals who were seen as challenging the traditional power structure. "It's never stated explicitly in meetings," Ramirez explained, "but the message is clear. Certain residents need to be reminded of community standards, extra scrutiny, selective enforcement, looking the other way when complaints come in." Officer Reynolds, Ramirez explained, was part of an inner circle that carried out these unwritten policies with particular zeal. "They call themselves the Preservers," Ramirez said with disgust, "like they're protecting some precious heritage instead of just enforcing their prejudices." "And Crawford knows about this?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Crawford encourages it," Ramirez confirmed. "Not in writing, never anything that could be proven, but he promotes those who understand the culture of the department and sidelines anyone who objects." Ramirez pulled out his phone, showing Marcus photos he had surreptitiously taken of internal documents. "These are the targeted patrol instructions for the last month. Notice how they concentrate on predominantly black neighborhoods and businesses, despite crime statistics showing no justification for it." Marcus scrolled through the images, his jaw tightening. One document showed his own name on a list titled Community Disruption Concerns, along with other black professionals and business owners in Riverview. "I need your help," Ramirez said finally. "I can provide information, but I can't be the face of this. My family—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Marcus understood the risk the young officer was taking. "What are you proposing?" "A federal investigation," Ramirez replied. "This goes beyond a few bad officers. It's systematic civil rights violations. But they'll need evidence they can't ignore, testimony they can verify." "Why me?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because you have credibility they can't easily dismiss. Military record, community standing, no criminal history they can use to discredit you. And because you're already on their radar, you have nothing to lose by fighting back." As Ramirez outlined his plan to gather evidence, Marcus weighed the implications. Taking on the entire police department would put not just him but his family in the crosshairs of powerful, potentially dangerous people. The safest option would be to walk away, maybe even take Ayana's suggestion to move somewhere else. But running would solve nothing. The systemic racism would remain, affecting countless others without the resources or platform to fight back. "I need time to think," Marcus finally said, "and to talk to my wife. This affects her and Zora, too." Ramirez nodded in understanding. "I'll continue gathering what I can. When you're ready, contact me through this." He handed Marcus a prepaid phone. "Only use it for text messages, single words. Yes if you're in, meeting, followed by a time and place if we need to talk." As they prepared to leave separately, Ramirez gripped Marcus's arm. "Be careful. They're watching you more closely than you realize." Marcus took a different route home, his mind racing with the implications of Ramirez's information and the decision before him. When he arrived, he found Ayana waiting in the living room, her expression a mixture of concern and resolve. "You met with someone from the department, didn't you?" she asked directly. Surprised by her perception, Marcus nodded. "How did you know?" "The way you've been checking the security system, documenting everything. You're building a case." She took his hands in hers. "And I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm with you. This is our home, our community. Running isn't the answer." Relief washed over Marcus. "It could get worse before it gets better," he warned. "I know," Ayana replied. "But what lesson would we be teaching Zora if we let intimidation drive us away?" The decision crystallized in that moment of shared purpose. Marcus would work with Ramirez to expose the corruption, no matter the personal cost. What neither of them knew was that their conversation at the park had not been as private as they thought. A jogger who had paused too long near their meeting spot, a department loyalist, had recognized Ramirez despite his civilian clothes. The next morning, Marcus texted a simple yes to the prepaid phone. Hours later, he received a news alert that Officer Miguel Ramirez had been hospitalized after a brutal attack by unknown assailants while off duty. The official report called it a random mugging, but Marcus knew better. The battle lines had been drawn, and the first casualty had already fallen. Despite the attack on Officer Ramirez, Marcus was determined to move forward with exposing the corruption within the Riverview Police Department. Ramirez remained hospitalized with serious injuries, unable to communicate, but stable. The official police statement classified the attack as a random mugging, though no suspects had been identified and no personal items were stolen. Marcus knew he needed legal expertise to navigate the dangerous waters ahead. Through his military connections, he located Elaine Chen, a civil rights attorney with experience in police misconduct cases. Her firm was based in the state capital, 2 hours away, which offered some protection from local influence. Chen agreed to meet Marcus at a neutral location outside Riverview. "What you're describing is disturbing but not unique," Chen told him, after he outlined the situation and shared the evidence Ramirez had provided. Police departments across the country have faced similar allegations. The challenge is proving systematic discrimination rather than isolated incidents. I have documentation of targeted harassment, witness statements from other veterans experiencing similar treatment, and internal department documents, Marcus explained. Plus, the timing of the attack on Ramirez is hardly coincidental. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "It's a start, but we'll need more. Patterns of behavior, statistical evidence of discriminatory practices, and ideally, testimony from inside the department." "Ramirez was supposed to be that inside source," Marcus said grimly. "Now he's in intensive care." "There are likely others," Chen suggested. "Officers uncomfortable with the department culture but afraid to speak out. With a formal investigation underway, some might find the courage to come forward." After reviewing Marcus's evidence, Chen proposed filing a class action lawsuit and simultaneously requesting a Department of Justice investigation into civil rights violations. "A two-pronged approach creates more pressure," she explained. "The AME lawsuit generates public attention, while the federal investigation provides teeth." In the days that followed, Chen worked with Marcus to identify other potential plaintiffs. The network of black veterans Marcus had connected with provided several candidates, and community outreach revealed more residents who had experienced similar patterns of harassment. Michael Jenkins agreed to join as a lead plaintiff alongside Marcus, his auto repair business having suffered multiple regulatory inspections after he spoke at a city council meeting about police profiling. By week's end, they had assembled a class of 12 plaintiffs, all respected community members with documented cases of targeted harassment. The filing of the lawsuit made front-page news in Riverview. "Local heroes allege systematic discrimination by police," the headline read, accompanied by photos of Marcus and other plaintiffs in their military uniforms. The story quickly gained traction beyond local media, with state and national outlets picking up the controversial case. The public reaction was predictably divided. Many residents expressed shock and support, particularly those from minority communities who had experienced similar treatment. Others defended the police department vehemently, accusing Marcus and the other plaintiffs of seeking attention or having ulterior motives. The statement from Chief Crawford was brief and dismissive. "These allegations are without merit and represent a mischaracterization of this department's commitment to equitable policing. We look forward to addressing these claims through proper legal channels." The department announced an internal investigation, a move Chen predicted would be largely ceremonial. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was the personal toll the public battle would take. Walking through Riverview now meant encountering polarized reactions. Some community members offered quiet words of support or grateful nods. Others made their disapproval clear with cold stares or explicit hostility. Traitor was spray-painted on his driveway one morning, The police response to his report was predictably indifferent. Marcus had expected opposition from the department, but the intensity of public division was wearing. The surveillance became more overt. Police cruisers parked across from his house for hours. Officers followed him openly when he drove through town. Reynolds, in particular, seemed to make a point of being visible, watching Marcus with undisguised contempt during his community activities. At a local restaurant, Marcus and Diana were seated near the kitchen despite having reservations for a quiet table. When they politely requested a different location, the manager apologetically explained that a computer glitch had affected their reservation. As they were about to leave, Marcus noticed Reynolds at the bar, watching the interaction with satisfaction. Chen warned Marcus that such harassment would likely intensify. "They're trying to pressure you into dropping the case," she explained. "Make your daily life so uncomfortable that giving up seems like the only option for peace." Despite these pressures, the investigation gained momentum. The Department of Justice responded to their request, assigning a preliminary team to review the evidence. Several former Riverview officers contacted Chen anonymously, providing accounts of discriminatory practices they had witnessed within the department. In a surprising development, Garcia, the female officer who had previously hinted at her discomfort with department practices, requested a meeting through Chen. In a secured hotel room outside town, Garcia provided detailed testimony about the unofficial policies targeting black residents. "The pressure to conform is intense," she explained. "Officers who don't participate are relegated to desk duty or worst assignments. Those who actively protest are driven out or worse." She described how Crawford maintained plausible deniability, while making his expectations clear through coded language and selective promotions. "Reynolds is his enforcer," she explained, "the one who makes sure everyone falls in line and carries out the unwritten policies." When asked why she was coming forward now, Garcia's answer was simple. "What happened to Ramirez crossed a line. We're supposed to protect people, not target them for speaking the truth." Her testimony provided the inside corroboration Chen had been seeking, strengthening both the lawsuit and the federal investigation. However, Garcia's involvement came at a personal cost. Within days of her confidential meeting, she was transferred to midnight dispatch duty, effectively removing her from any meaningful police work. The message to other potential whistleblowers was clear. As the case progressed, Marcus discovered that the corruption extended beyond the police department. Records requests for police complaint statistics were delayed or denied. City Council members avoided meeting with plaintiffs. The mayor issued a lukewarm statement about taking all allegations seriously, while emphasizing his complete confidence in Chief Crawford's leadership. Chen wasn't surprised. "Police departments don't operate in isolation," she explained. "They're part of a power structure. Crawford has connections throughout local government, and they're closing ranks to protect their own." The revelation that the opposition was more extensive than initially thought was disheartening but not deterring. Marcus had faced seemingly insurmountable odds in combat situations and had learned that persistence often made the difference between failure and success. What he hadn't considered was that those he loved would face the most insidious forms of retaliation, targeting not just their safety, but the very fabric of their daily lives. Have you ever witnessed corruption in systems meant to protect us? Comment number 1 if you believe whistleblowers like Officer Ramirez and Garcia deserve more protection. Like this video if you think Marcus is right to pursue justice despite the personal cost. Subscribe to see how this battle against systemic discrimination unfolds. The question now becomes, as the investigation reveals corruption extending beyond just the police department, how far will the opposition go to silence those speaking truth to power? And can Marcus protect his family while fighting for justice? The backlash began subtly at first. Zora came home from school quieter than usual, evading questions about her day. After gentle probing from Ayana, she finally admitted that some classmates were avoiding her. Madison said her dad told her not to play with me anymore because my daddy hates police officers and wants criminals to take over the town, she explained, her voice small with confusion. Madison's father, Marcus later discovered, was a cousin of Officer Reynolds. The isolation spread quickly. Playdates were cancelled. Birthday party invitations dried up. At the school's parent-teacher conference, Marcus and Ayana noticed other parents maintaining a pointed distance. The teacher, Mrs. Holland, seemed uncomfortable discussing Zora's suddenly withdrawn behavior. "She's a brilliant child," Mrs. Holland said carefully, "but there have been some social challenges recently." "You mean she's being ostracized because of our lawsuit?" Ayana stated directly. Mrs. Holland's hesitation was telling. The school administration prefers not to get involved in community disputes. "This isn't a dispute about a fence line," Marcus replied evenly. "It's about constitutional rights and the safety of citizens, including the children in your care." The administrator, who had been silently observing the conference, interjected. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington, I can assure you that Riverview Elementary treats all students equally. However, we cannot control the personal choices of other families." The implication was clear. The school would do nothing to address the bullying if it stemmed from parental influence. The pressure extended beyond Zora to Ayana's professional life. As a nurse at Riverview Memorial for over a decade, Ayana had an impeccable record and was respected by colleagues and patients alike. Suddenly, her supervisor began questioning her work, citing concerns that had never existed before. "We've received complaints about your bedside manner," the nursing director informed her during an unexpected performance review. "Patients, saying you've been abrupt or inattentive." "Which patients?" Ayana challenged. "I'd like to address their concerns directly." The director shuffled papers uncomfortably. The complaints were anonymous. Hospital policy protects patient confidentiality. When Ayana requested copies of the complaints for her personnel file, she was told they had been submitted verbally. The targeting escalated when Ayana's assigned parking space was repeatedly vandalized. First, nails were scattered where she would drive in. Then her car was keyed with racial slurs. The hospital security footage from those incidents was mysteriously unavailable due to system maintenance. Marcus's professional reputation came under attack as well. Anonymous posts appeared on military forums, questioning his service record and suggesting he had exaggerated his accomplishments. Though easily disproven, the claims circulated widely in local social media groups, creating a cloud of doubt around his character. The community center where Marcus volunteered faced new obstacles as well. The building was suddenly subject to multiple code inspections, resulting in costly required renovations. An anonymous donor who had committed to funding the center's after-school program withdrew their support without explanation. Samuel Thompson was devastated, but determined to keep the center open, even as resources dwindled. "They're trying to isolate us," Marcus observed during a late-night conversation with Ayana. "Cut off our support systems, make us feel alone." Ayana nodded wearily. The strain was visible in the new lines around her eyes, the tension she carried in her shoulders. "It's working to some extent. People are afraid to be associated with us, afraid they'll be targeted next. Maybe we should consider temporarily relocating Zora to stay with your sister," Marcus suggested reluctantly, "just until things settle down." The suggestion hung heavily between them. Separating their family felt like a victory for those working against them, yet Zora's well-being had to be their priority. Before Ayana could respond, Marcus's phone rang. It was Samuel Thompson, his voice tight with controlled panic. "The center's on fire, Marcus. You need to get down here now." Marcus arrived to find fire trucks surrounding the community center, smoke billowing from broken windows. Thompson stood watching helplessly as firefighters battled the blaze. "Someone broke in and set it deliberately," he explained grimly. "Security alarm went off, but by the time I got here, the front office was engulfed." As they watched the firefighters work, Detective Collins arrived to investigate. His cursory questions and dismissive tone made it clear that this would be another incident without resolution. "Could be kids," Collins suggested, "or possibly related to that gang activity we've been monitoring." "What gang activity?" Marcus challenged. "This neighborhood has never had gang problems." Collins shrugged. "We have our intelligence sources." As the detective walked away, Marcus noticed Reynolds sitting in an unmarked car across the street, observing the scene with what looked like satisfaction. The message couldn't have been clearer. Nothing Marcus valued was safe. The community center, a second home to generations of local children, was now a charred shell. The programs would be suspended indefinitely, leaving vulnerable kids without a safe haven after school. The calculated cruelty of targeting a facility that served children struck Marcus as a new low, even for those he now knew to be capable of significant corruption. Later that night, as Marcus and Ayanna discussed the escalating situation, the strain between them was palpable. "I can handle the professional attacks," Ayanna said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "But Zora's suffering, and now the community center. It's too much, Marcus." "If we back down now, nothing changes," Marcus replied, though the resolve in his voice was tinged with doubt. "They win. Everything we've worked for is lost. And if we don't back down, what else are we prepared to lose?" The question hung between them, impossible to answer yet impossible to ignore. Their marriage, previously a source of unshakable strength, was now under the same pressure as every other aspect of their lives. The strain was visible in their interactions, in the careful way they spoke to avoid triggering fears neither wanted to acknowledge. As they prepared for bed, Marcus's phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. The image that appeared on his screen froze his blood, a clear photograph of Zora playing in the schoolyard, taken that very day. There was no text, no threat. None was needed. The implication was unmistakable. Marcus deleted the image immediately, not wanting Ayanna to see it, but the message had achieved its purpose. The line between professional battle and personal threat had been erased. Everything and everyone he loved was now a potential target. That night, as his family slept, Marcus sat in the darkened living room, considering options that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. The lawsuit was gaining traction, the federal investigation proceeding, but the personal cost was mounting beyond what any family should bear. For the first time since returning to Riverview, Marcus found himself questioning whether justice was worth the price his loved ones were being forced to pay. The fire investigation at the community center concluded with an official report declaring the cause inconclusive, despite witness statements about a car speeding away just before the blaze was discovered. Insurance would cover only a portion of the damage, leaving the center's future in jeopardy. For Marcus, the deliberately inadequate investigation represented everything wrong with Riverview's power structure. At Chen's suggestion, Marcus compiled all the evidence they had gathered: the targeted harassment, the attack on Ramirez, the professional retaliation against Ayanna, the threatening photo of Zora, and now the community center fire, and reached out to national media outlets. The story caught the attention of a prominent investigative journalist named Diane Winters, who had built her career exposing institutional corruption. "This isn't just about one police department," she told Marcus during their initial call. "It's about how power insulates itself, how systems resist accountability. People need to see that." Winters arrived in Riverview with a small team conducting interviews with Marcus and other plaintiffs in the lawsuit. Her thoroughness impressed Marcus. She verified every claim, insisted on multiple sources, and approached the story with both compassion and journalistic rigor. When her three-part exposé aired on national television, the impact was immediate and far-reaching. The first segment focused on the patterns of discriminatory policing in Riverview, using statistical analysis to demonstrate disparities in traffic stops, arrests, and use of force. The second examined the retaliation against those who challenged the system, including the suspicious attack on Ramirez and the professional harassment of plaintiffs. The final segment widened the lens to show how similar patterns existed in departments across the country, placing Riverview within a national context of police accountability failures. The day after the final segment aired, the Department of Justice announced it was expanding its preliminary inquiry into a full investigation of the Riverview Police Department for systematic civil rights violations. The State Attorney General's office followed with its own investigation into potential criminal misconduct by department leadership. Chief Crawford held a hastily organized press conference, flanked by Mayor Wilson and several city council members. His statement was defensive and dismissive. "These allegations represent a distorted view of our department's professional practices," Crawford insisted. "A few disgruntled individuals with personal agendas have created a fictional narrative that unfairly tarnishes the reputation of dedicated officers." In what seemed like a calculated move to show accountability while admitting no wrongdoing, Crawford announced that Officer Reynolds had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigations. "This action should not be interpreted as an admission of any impropriety," Crawford emphasized. "It is merely a procedural step to ensure complete transparency." Marcus watched the press conference with Chen, noting the careful choreography. "They're sacrificing Reynolds to protect Crawford and the system," Chen observed. "Classic damage control." The national attention created both opportunity and danger. Supporters from across the country sent donations to rebuild the community center. Civil rights organizations offered resources and expertise for the ongoing legal battle, but locally the division deepened. Death threats arrived at Marcus's home. Protesters gathered outside the hospital where Ayana worked, holding signs accusing her family of being race baiters and cop haters. The Washington family relocated temporarily to a hotel in a neighboring town, their home now too dangerous to occupy. In this atmosphere of heightened tension, Marcus received an unexpected message through his attorney. Officer Reynolds wanted to meet privately, claiming to have information crucial to the case. "It's a trap," Chen warned immediately. "He's Crawford's right hand. Whatever he's offering, it's not worth the risk." But Marcus wasn't so sure. Reynolds had been the face of the harassment from the beginning, but always within a system that rewarded such behavior. Now that he'd been suspended and publicly identified as part of the problem, his allegiance might be shifting. "What if he's looking to save himself?" Marcus suggested. "He knows the investigations are serious. He could be looking for a deal." After much debate, a meeting was arranged with extensive precautions. It would take place at Chen's office in the state capital, with security present and the entire conversation recorded. Reynolds would be searched upon arrival, and multiple witnesses would be present. Even with these safeguards, Marcus felt the hairs on his neck rise when Reynolds entered the conference room. The officer looked diminished somehow, his usual arrogance replaced by a wary defensiveness. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," Reynolds began awkwardly. "I know there's no reason you should trust me." "You're right about that," Marcus replied evenly. "So why are we here?" Reynolds glanced at the recording device on the table, then at Chen and her paralegal positioned nearby. "I have evidence that could help your case, dashboard camera footage. That never made it into official records. Recordings of meetings where Crawford gave explicit instructions about targeting certain residents." Marcus exchanged a glance with Chen, whose skepticism was evident. "Why would you help us now?" Marcus asked directly. "Self-preservation," Reynolds admitted without hesitation. "The department's hanging me out to dry. Crawford's telling everyone I was a rogue officer, that I misinterpreted policies, making me the scapegoat while he walks away clean." There was a bitter edge to his voice that rang true. "And suddenly you've developed a conscience about the harassment you participated in," Chen challenged. Reynolds had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm not claiming moral high ground here, but if I'm going down, I'm not going alone." "Crawford gave the orders. I have proof." "Where is this evidence?" Marcus asked. Reynolds explained that the footage was stored on an encrypted drive hidden in a storage unit rented under his brother's name. He would provide access in exchange for consideration in any criminal charges that might emerge from the investigations. "I'm not asking for immunity," Reynolds clarified, "just recognition of cooperation." After Reynolds left, Chen remained deeply suspicious. "Convenient that this evidence is in a remote location he wants to lead you to. This has setup written all over it." Marcus shared her concerns but was reluctant to dismiss the opportunity entirely. What if he is telling the truth? That evidence would prove systematic directives rather than individual actions. It's exactly what we need. After extensive debate, they devised a compromise. Marcus would meet Reynolds to retrieve the evidence, but with significant safeguards: multiple witnesses following at a distance, location tracking, immediate police involvement from neighboring jurisdictions, if anything seemed suspicious. The meeting was set for the following evening at the storage facility, a well-lit public location with security cameras. Marcus arrived early with a small team of supporters strategically positioned around the facility. Reynolds appeared at the appointed time, alone as agreed. He led Marcus to the storage unit, opened it with a key and gestured toward a metal lockbox on a shelf. "Everything's in there. Passwords are written inside the lid." As Marcus moved toward the box, car headlights suddenly illuminated the storage unit. Multiple vehicles blocked the entrance. Men in plainclothes emerged, their stances and coordinated movements marking them unmistakably as police officers despite their lack of uniforms. "Washington," a voice called out, "we received reports of a break-in at this location. Come out with your hands visible." The trap was sprung, but not as Chen had anticipated. This wasn't an ambush designed to physically harm Marcus. It was a setup to discredit him, to create a scenario where he could be arrested under seemingly legitimate circumstances. Reynolds' expression confirmed Marcus's suspicion. There was no evidence, no dashboard footage. The entire meeting had been orchestrated to lure Marcus into a compromising situation. As he was handcuffed and placed in a police car, Marcus noticed the security cameras that should have recorded the encounter had been covered or turned away. The officers discovered a substantial quantity of drugs in the storage unit, which they claimed gave them probable cause to search Marcus's vehicle. There in the trunk they found an unregistered handgun. Marcus, a decorated military officer with no criminal record, now faced serious charges for drug possession and illegal weapons. The local news reported his arrest without question, accepting the police narrative completely. The headline "Civil Rights Plaintiff Arrested on Drug Charges" spread rapidly, undermining months of carefully built credibility. Reynolds, portrayed as having assisted in the arrest, gave a statement suggesting he had suspected Marcus's criminal activities all along. While Marcus sat in a holding cell awaiting processing, he could feel the momentum of their case slipping away. Everything they had worked for was being systematically dismantled through this calculated move. But even in this dark moment, Marcus held on to one critical fact. They had anticipated some form of trap. Chen had insisted on multiple witnesses and video documentation of the entire encounter from their team's perspectives. The truth would eventually emerge. The question was whether it would be soon enough to counter the damage being done to their cause and to Marcus's freedom. Did you see that betrayal coming? Comment number 1 if you believe Marcus should have trusted his attorney's instincts about Reynolds. Like this video if you think the truth will eventually prevail despite this devastating setback. Subscribe to see how Marcus fights back against this calculated attempt to destroy his credibility and freedom. The system has revealed just how far it will go to protect itself, but has it underestimated Marcus Washington's determination? What would you do if you were framed for crimes you didn't commit while fighting for justice? Marcus spent 3 nights in the Riverview County Jail before his bail hearing. The judge, a longtime associate of Chief Crawford, set bail at an extraordinary $500,000, far beyond what would be typical for the charges. The message was clear. They intended to keep Marcus detained, separated from his support network, and unable to effectively fight both his criminal charges and the civil rights case. The betrayal extended beyond Reynolds and the immediate arrest. Marcus's military status was suspended pending investigation. Several plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit, frightened by his arrest, withdrew their participation. On social media and local news comment sections, the narrative shifted dramatically. People who had expressed support now questioned whether they had been deceived by a criminal hiding behind claims of discrimination. Even some longtime allies maintained a cautious distance, unwilling to be associated with someone facing such serious charges. But not everyone abandoned him. Attorney Chen worked tirelessly, leveraging every legal resource available. The witnesses who had documented the setup provided sworn statements. Digital forensics experts examined the videos they had captured, highlighting inconsistencies in the official police report. Most critically, Chen discovered that the officers had made a crucial error in their haste to frame Marcus. The serial number on the handgun allegedly found in his trunk matched a weapon that had been logged into police evidence 3 months earlier in an unrelated case and never properly checked out. This discrepancy provided the first concrete evidence of evidence tampering. Meanwhile, Ayana mobilized community support, speaking publicly about the obvious frame-up and maintaining her husband's innocence. Despite threats and harassment, she became the public face of their continued fight, showing a strength that impressed even those who had known her for years. Through Chen's persistent efforts and the emerging evidence of police misconduct, A.E. Xiao, judge from outside Riverview, was assigned to review the bail decision. Recognizing the suspicious circumstances, he reduced the amount significantly and added a stern rebuke to the original judge for the excessive determination. With help from supporters who pooled resources for his bail fund, Marcus was released to home confinement with an ankle monitor after 10 days in custody. The reunion with his family was bittersweet. Zora, confused and frightened by her father's absence, clung to him desperately. Ayana had lost weight, the strain of the past weeks evident in her exhausted eyes. Their home, once a sanctuary, now felt vulnerable, with increased security measures a constant reminder of the threats they faced. The experience of imprisonment, though relatively brief, had affected Marcus deeply. The calculated humiliation of the arrest, the dehumanizing processing procedures, the denial of dignity inherent in the system, all provided personal insight into what many in his community had experienced without the resources or platform to fight back. This understanding strengthened his resolve, even as it sobered his expectations about the path ahead. Upon his release, Marcus learned that while he had been detained, significant developments had occurred in their case. The federal investigation had expanded to include the circumstances of his arrest. FBI agents had interviewed multiple officers from the Riverview Police Department, creating internal friction as some officers began cooperating to protect themselves. Most surprisingly, an anonymous source had provided actual footage of Marcus's arrest to Chen, captured from an angle that clearly showed officers planting evidence in his vehicle. The source was presumed to be someone within the department, suggesting that not everyone was willing to participate in the frame-up. The emergence of this exonerating evidence shifted momentum once again. National media outlets that had reported Marcus's arrest now covered the apparent attempt to frame him, reinforcing the original allegations of corruption. The Department of Justice fast-tracked their investigation, taking the unusual step of publicly acknowledging serious concerns about potential civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. In a significant development, Officer Garcia, who had previously provided testimony about departmental practices, came forward publicly despite the professional risks. Her detailed account of the internal response to the lawsuit, including explicit discussions about neutralizing Marcus and other plaintiffs, provided damning evidence of conspiracy. As scrutiny intensified, cracks appeared in the previously unified front of department leadership. Reynolds, facing potential federal charges for his role in framing Marcus, began suggesting through his attorney that he had been following orders from Chief Crawford. Other officers, seeing the direction of the investigation, began providing information to distance themselves from the misconduct. Chief Crawford, sensing the shifting loyalty, held another press conference to announce an expanded administrative leave for several officers pending the outcome of investigations. He maintained his own ignorance of any wrongdoing, attributing any problems to a few officers who may have misunderstood department policies or acted on personal biases. The mayor and city council members, who had previously stood firmly with Crawford, now maintained a noticeable distance, issuing carefully worded statements about taking all allegations seriously and awaiting the results of the ongoing investigations. Within weeks, the criminal charges against Marcus were dismissed due to the overwhelming evidence of misconduct. The district attorney, facing questions about her office's role in the prosecution, recused herself from the case and requested an independent review. The focus of investigations shifted from Marcus to those who had orchestrated his frame-up. As Marcus's legal situation improved, the broader case against the department gained significant traction. Multiple officers, seeking to avoid federal charges, provided testimony about the systematic targeting of black residents. Internal documents emerged, showing explicit directives to conduct extra surveillance in predominantly black neighborhoods and apply stricter enforcement standards to black residents, particularly those in positions of influence. The picture that emerged was damning. A department culture that not only tolerated but actively encouraged discriminatory practices, led by a chief who maintained plausible deniability while making his expectations clear through coded language and selective rewards. In a stunning development, federal agents arrested Reynolds on multiple charges, including evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. His attorney immediately signaled his willingness to cooperate fully in exchange for consideration in sentencing, confirming what many had suspected. Reynolds was ready to testify against Chief Crawford and others to save himself. As these events unfolded, Marcus struggled with complex emotions. The vindication was satisfying but insufficient to heal the wounds inflicted on his family and community. The center remained damaged, Zora still suffered socially, and Ayanna continued to face professional challenges despite the changing narrative. Most troubling was the persistent division within Riverview itself. While support for Marcus had grown as evidence of corruption emerged, a significant portion of the community remained skeptical or outright hostile, viewing the federal investigation as outside interference rather than necessary accountability. The road to genuine change, Marcus realized, would be much longer and more difficult than exposing the immediate corruption. The systems that had allowed such abuses to flourish remained largely intact, protected by those with vested interests in maintaining the status quo. As Reynolds prepared to testify against his former superiors, Marcus knew that the coming months would bring new challenges. The most powerful opponents had yet to face real accountability, and they would not surrender their positions without a desperate fight. The question now was not just about winning the legal battle, but about whether the emerging truth could heal a community fractured by decades of institutional racism and the painful process of confronting it. The weeks following Reynolds' arrest brought dramatic changes to Riverview. Chief Crawford was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of multiple investigations. Several senior officers resigned rather than face scrutiny of their conduct. The mayor appointed an interim police chief from outside the department, a retired state police captain with a reputation for integrity and reform. For Marcus, the professional victories were tempered by personal struggles. Though legally vindicated, the damage to his reputation lingered in some quarters. Former friends who had distanced themselves during his arrest now offered awkward attempts at reconciliation. Military colleagues who had questioned his character reached out to express belated support. These interactions left Marcus with a clearer understanding of who his true allies were. The most difficult aspect of this period was the ongoing impact on his family. Zora had become withdrawn, her natural exuberance dimmed by confusion and anxiety. Though many classmates had resumed friendly relations, the experience of abandonment had left its mark on her developing sense of trust. Ayanna continued to face subtle professional challenges, though the most overt harassment had ceased. The stress had affected her health, leading to migraines and insomnia that concerned Marcus deeply. His own recovery was complicated by symptoms of PTSD, triggered not by his combat experiences, but by the trauma of his arrest and detention. Nightmares about being wrongfully imprisoned pulled him from sleep. Anxiety spiked when police vehicles approached. The hypervigilance that had served him well in combat now manifested as a constant, exhausting alertness to potential threats. Through it all, the civil rights case and federal investigation proceeded. Reynolds, facing serious federal charges, had indeed turned state's evidence, providing detailed testimony about department practices and the direct involvement of leadership in discriminatory policies. His cooperation, while clearly self-serving, offered crucial insider confirmation of the systematic nature of the abuses. The most significant development came when federal prosecutors indicted Chief Crawford on multiple counts of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The indictment detailed how Crawford had established and maintained a departmental culture that systematically targeted black residents for harassment and discriminatory enforcement, particularly those who demonstrated leadership or questioned authority. The case against Crawford appeared strong, with testimony from multiple officers and substantial documentation. Yet as the trial date approached, community tensions escalated once again. Crawford's supporters portrayed him as the victim of a political witch hunt, a dedicated public servant being sacrificed to appease activists. They organized rallies at City Hall, demanding his reinstatement and denouncing the federal investigation as unwarranted interference in local affairs. Counter-protests emerged in support of the victims of police misconduct, creating a visual representation of Riverview's deep division. As the star plaintiff in the civil rights case and the most prominent victim of departmental retaliation, Marcus found himself at the center of these tensions. Death threats increased. Security experts advised the family to vary their routines and limit public appearances. The pressure took a toll on their marriage, with Ayanna and Marcus sometimes disagreeing about how to balance safety concerns with the need to continue advocating for change. When Crawford's trial finally began, the national media returned to Riverview in force. The courthouse was surrounded by security barriers and police from neighboring jurisdictions, creating a tense atmosphere that felt more like a military zone than a hall of justice. Reynolds's testimony proved pivotal. Over 3 days on the witness stand, he detailed specific instructions from Crawford regarding the targeting of problematic elements in the community, code for successful black residents who spoke out on social issues. He described meetings where officers were told to find reasons to stop certain individuals, to apply maximum scrutiny to their activities, and to ensure they understood their place in the community hierarchy. Most damning was Reynolds's account of Crawford's direct involvement in planning Marcus's frame-up, including the selection of the storage facility, the planting of evidence, and the coordination with sympathetic judges to ensure maximum detention time. Crawford's defense team attacked Reynolds's credibility relentlessly, portraying him as a rogue officer attempting to minimize his own culpability by implicating his superiors. They presented character witnesses who described Crawford as fair-minded and dedicated to equitable policing. Former mayors and city officials testified to his professionalism and integrity. The prosecution countered with statistical evidence showing clear patterns of discriminatory enforcement under Crawford's leadership. Multiple officers corroborated elements of Reynolds's testimony. Former victims of police harassment shared their experiences, creating a comprehensive picture of systematic abuses spanning Crawford's entire tenure. When Marcus took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. With measured dignity, he recounted not just the frame-up and arrest, but the years of subtle and overt discrimination he had faced since returning to Riverview. He described the impact on his family, the damage to the community center, and the division created within Riverview. His testimony was neither vengeful nor self-pitying, but a clear-eyed assessment of the human cost of institutional racism. This case isn't about hatred of police, Marcus concluded. It's about ensuring that police departments serve and protect all citizens equally, regardless of race. It's about accountability for those who betray their oath and the public trust. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. Deliberations stretched from hours into days, raising concerns about a possible hung jury. When the jury finally returned, the verdict was stunning. They had failed to reach unanimous agreement on most counts against Crawford. The judge declared a mistrial on those charges, with only minor convictions on lesser counts of administrative misconduct. The courtroom erupted in confused reactions. Crawford's supporters celebrated, while those who had testified against him sat in shocked silence. Marcus felt a familiar disappointment settle over him, the sense that justice, so clearly warranted by the evidence, had once again been denied. In the days that followed, troubling information emerged. 2 jurors reported being approached outside the courthouse during deliberations, receiving veiled threats regarding their vote. Another juror's spouse had mysteriously received a job offer from a company with connections to city government, contingent on accepting immediately. These allegations led to an investigation of jury tampering, resulting in the conviction being set aside entirely and a new trial ordered. To ensure impartiality, the retrial would be moved to a different jurisdiction, 60 miles from Riverview. As these developments unfolded, Crawford resigned his position, maintaining his innocence while citing health concerns and the toll of the proceedings on his family. The irony of this justification, given the suffering his actions had caused, so many families, was not lost on Marcus. The interim chief was appointed permanently, with a mandate to implement comprehensive reforms within the department. New policies for traffic stops, use of force, and community engagement were developed with input from diverse community representatives, including Marcus. An independent civilian oversight board was established to review complaints and monitor departmental practices. For Marcus and the other plaintiffs, the civil case continued separate from the criminal proceedings. With the evidence now public and additional victims coming forward, the city faced the likelihood of significant financial penalties and mandated reforms. Settlement negotiations began, focusing not just on monetary compensation, but on structural changes to prevent future abuses. As the second trial approached, Reynolds accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify again in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation secured, prosecutors expanded their case against Crawford to include additional charges based on new evidence that had emerged. Other officers, seeing the direction of the investigation and fearing personal liability, began providing further testimony about Crawford's direct involvement in discriminatory practices. The foundation was being laid for a stronger case, one that would be harder for even a sympathetic jury to dismiss. Through these legal maneuvers and public battles, Marcus found his own perspective evolving. The initial anger and desire for personal vindication had transformed into something more constructive, a commitment to sustainable change that would outlast any individual case or conviction. He began working with the interim chief on community policing initiatives, using his unique perspective as both a victim of police misconduct and a respected community leader to bridge divides that had seemed insurmountable months earlier. In these efforts, Marcus found a path toward personal healing as well. The nightmares began to subside, the hypervigilance slowly eased. As he worked to transform the systems that had caused such harm, he reclaimed a sense of agency that his trauma had threatened to destroy. The Washington family remained under pressure, but they were no longer facing it alone. A network of support had coalesced around them, providing practical assistance and emotional solidarity. Zora began to regain her confidence, bolstered by new friendships and a school administration that, sensing the shifting winds, had become proactively supportive. Ayana found allies within the hospital, including senior staff who publicly defended her professional reputation and addressed the previous harassment. Their marriage, tested by the immense stresses of the past months, emerged stronger through their commitment to honest communication and shared purpose. The community center, symbolic of both the destruction caused by corruption and the resilience of those opposing it, was being rebuilt with donations from across the country. The new facility would include expanded programs and enhanced security, serving more children than before. As the date for Crawford's second trial approached, Marcus prepared to testify again, this time with a broader perspective on what justice truly required. The conviction of any individual, even one as culpable as Crawford, would be insufficient without systemic change. The real victory would be in the transformation of institutions, the protection of future generations from similar abuses, and the healing of a community divided by decades of unacknowledged injustice. The path ahead remained difficult, with powerful interests still invested in maintaining the status quo. But for the first time since his return to Riverview, Marcus felt genuinely hopeful that meaningful change was not just possible, but already underway. The second trial of former police chief James Crawford began 11 months after Marcus's initial traffic stop. Relocated to the county courthouse in Westbrook, 60 miles from Riverview, the proceedings attracted national attention as a test case for police accountability. The prosecution team, strengthened by additional Department of Justice attorneys, presented an expanded case against Crawford. New witnesses included officers who had initially remained silent, but now came forward, describing specific instances where Crawford had directed discriminatory enforcement. Internal department emails and text messages obtained through federal subpoenas, provided documentary evidence of coordination in targeting black residents for heightened scrutiny. Reynolds, testifying as part of his plea agreement, offered even more detailed accounts of Crawford's direct involvement in the conspiracy to frame Marcus. His testimony now included descriptions of planning meetings where Crawford had explicitly stated that Washington needed to be put in his place to discourage others from challenging department practices. Forensic evidence confirmed that the weapon planted in Marcus's vehicle had indeed been taken from police evidence storage with Crawford's authorization. Security camera footage from buildings near the storage facility, initially claimed to be unavailable, had been recovered by FBI technicians showing officers preparing. Security camera footage from buildings near the storage facility, initially claimed to be unavailable, had been recovered by FBI technicians showing officers preparing the storage unit before Marcus's arrival. The prosecution's case appeared overwhelming, yet Crawford's defense team fought vigorously. Their strategy centered on portraying Crawford as a scapegoat for institutional problems that predated his leadership. They called character witnesses who described Crawford's community, service and family values. They highlighted his decades of service without formal complaints in his personnel file, attributing this clean record to exemplary leadership rather than a system designed to suppress criticism. Most significantly, the defense worked to shift blame to Reynolds, portraying him as a rogue officer who had misinterpreted Crawford's directives and taken extreme measures without authorization. Officer Reynolds, facing serious charges himself, has every incentive to implicate others to reduce his own culpability, Crawford's attorney argued in closing statements. His testimony is that of a desperate man willing to say anything to save himself. Throughout the trial, Marcus and his family faced continued harassment from Crawford supporters. Their hotel received threatening calls. Protesters outside the courthouse carried signs with racial slurs and accusations that the Washington family was destroying police morale for financial gain. Security concerns required constant escort for Marcus and his family, turning even simple movements into logistical challenges. Despite these pressures, Marcus delivered compelling testimony that humanized the impact of discriminatory policing. He described not just his own experiences, but those of community members who lacked the platform or resources to fight back against injustice. His military service and community leadership gave his words additional weight with the diverse jury as deliberations began. Legal experts predicted a swift conviction based on the overwhelming evidence. Instead, days passed with no verdict. When the jury finally returned after a week of deliberation, their announcement stunned the courtroom. They were deadlocked on the most serious charges, unable to reach the unanimous decision required for conviction. Investigation later revealed that 2 jurors had steadfastly refused to convict, regardless of evidence, with one reportedly stating in deliberations that police need to be free to do their jobs without Monday morning quarterbacking. Despite the judge's instructions to evaluate the evidence objectively, deeply ingrained biases had prevailed with these jurors. The partial verdict delivered convictions only on lesser charges of misconduct in office and obstruction of justice, with hung jury declared on the more serious civil rights violations that carried substantial prison time. Crawford would face minimal consequences despite orchestrating years of discriminatory practices and a criminal conspiracy to frame an innocent man. The gallery erupted in mixed reactions of outrage and celebration. Marcus sat stoically as the verdict was read, his expression revealing nothing of the disappointment he surely felt. Beside him, Ayanna gripped his hand tightly, her eyes fixed forward with dignified resolve. As they exited the courthouse through a phalanx of reporters, Marcus offered only a brief statement. Today's outcome is disappointing but not surprising. The systems that enable discrimination are deeply embedded. Our fight continues. The apparent miscarriage of justice caused immediate backlash. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning the outcome. Legal analysts on national news programs expressed shock at the jury's failure to convict despite overwhelming evidence. Protests erupted in cities across the country, with Riverview becoming a symbol of the challenges in holding police leadership accountable. In this atmosphere of public outrage, a courthouse clerk came forward with disturbing information. She had overheard a phone conversation in which one juror discussed receiving a substantial gift in exchange for holding out against conviction. Another jury member reported being followed to his hotel and receiving veiled threats about his family's safety if he voted to convict. These allegations triggered an FBI investigation into jury tampering. Within weeks, evidence emerged confirming inappropriate contact with multiple jurors. Phone records linked these contacts to associates of Crawford with connections to city government. The judge, citing clear evidence of jury tampering, took the extraordinary step of setting aside the verdict entirely and ordering a complete retrial with a new jury pool in yet another jurisdiction. For Marcus and his family, the prospect of enduring another trial, with all its emotional and practical burdens, was daunting, yet the alternative, allowing corruption to escape accountability, was unacceptable. The Washington family committed to seeing the process through, however long it might take. As preparations for the second trial began, Crawford's position deteriorated rapidly. Former allies, seeing the mounting evidence of jury tampering, distanced themselves to avoid being implicated in the expanding investigation. Reynolds, hoping to improve his own position, provided additional details about Crawford's orchestration of the frame-up and subsequent attempts to influence the trial. Facing mounting legal challenges and abandoned by former supporters, Crawford made a calculated decision. Through his attorneys, he approached prosecutors about a potential plea agreement. After extensive negotiations, a deal was reached. Crawford would plead guilty to civil rights violations and conspiracy charges, accept a 5-year sentence with possibility of parole, and provide testimony about other officials involved in systematic discrimination within Riverview's government. The plea agreement spared Marcus and his family the ordeal of another trial, but left many feeling justice remained incomplete. 5 years seemed insufficient punishment for the harm Crawford had caused to countless lives through years of discriminatory leadership and direct criminal actions. Yet the conviction itself was significant, a rare instance of a police chief being held criminally accountable for systematic civil rights violations. More importantly, Crawford's testimony implicated several city officials who had enabled and protected discriminatory practices. Investigations expanded to include members of the city council, judicial officers, and administrative officials who had been complicit in maintaining the system of inequality. What had begun as a case against individual officers was evolving into a comprehensive examination of institutional racism throughout Riverview's power structure. These developments coincided with significant changes in the police department itself. Under new leadership committed to reform, policies were rewritten with community input. Officers received enhanced training on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. A civilian oversight board with real authority was established to review complaints and monitor departmental practices. While these reforms represented meaningful progress, Marcus understood that changing policies was easier than changing culture. The deeply ingrained attitudes and assumptions that had enabled discrimination would not disappear through administrative action alone. True transformation would require ongoing vigilance and community engagement. As this next phase began, Marcus found himself at a crossroads. The immediate battle for accountability had achieved partial success, but the larger struggle for equality continued. His family had paid a heavy price for standing against injustice. Now they needed to decide whether to continue leading this fight or focus on healing their own wounds and rebuilding their lives. 1 year after the initial traffic stop that had sparked the cascade of events, Marcus Washington drove through Riverview with his window partially open, the spring air carrying the scent of new beginnings. The town looked the same on the surface, familiar buildings, streets, and landmarks. But beneath that appearance, fundamental shifts had occurred. Crawford had begun serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility, his fall from respected authority figure to convicted criminal complete. Reynolds had received a reduced sentence in exchange for his extensive cooperation, but would still serve significant time. Several city officials implicated in Crawford's testimony had resigned or faced charges of their own. The power structure that had enabled systematic discrimination was being dismantled piece by piece. The civil lawsuit had concluded with a substantial settlement for Marcus and the other plaintiffs. Beyond monetary compensation, the agreement included comprehensive reforms to police practices, investment in underserved communities, and establishment of scholarship funds for minority students pursuing careers in law enforcement or public service. The community center had been rebuilt, larger and better equipped than before. Programs serving local youth had expanded, with special emphasis on building understanding between young people and police officers through facilitated dialogues and joint community projects. Samuel Thompson, though approaching retirement age, oversaw these initiatives with renewed energy, mentoring younger leaders to eventually take his place. For the Washington family, healing remained a work in progress. Zora had regained much of her previous exuberance, but still carried a new wariness. Beyond her years, Ayana had been promoted at the hospital, her professional reputation restored and enhanced through her dignified handling of the retaliation she had faced. Their marriage, tested by extraordinary pressures, had emerged stronger through their shared commitment to each other and to principles larger than themselves. Marcus had become a reluctant but effective symbol of the fight against systematic discrimination. Invitations to speak at conferences and universities arrived regularly. Civil rights organizations sought his perspective on police reform initiatives. A major publisher had expressed interest in his story. These opportunities offered platforms to advance the cause of equality, but also pulled him away from the family time he valued and the local community work he found most meaningful. On this particular morning, Marcus was headed to the police station not to file a complaint or confront hostility, but to participate in a community advisory meeting with the new chief. Under federal oversight and reformed leadership, the department was working to rebuild trust with the communities it served, particularly those that had experienced the most severe discrimination under the previous administration. As Marcus approached the station, he noticed a patrol car signaling him to pull over. For a moment, old reflexes of anxiety and defensiveness surfaced. He carefully pulled to the curb, positioned his hands visibly on the steering wheel, and waited with measured breathing. Officer Jamila Wilson approached his vehicle with professional courtesy. A recent addition to the force, she represented the department's efforts to recruit officers who reflected the community's diversity and shared its values. "Good morning, Lieutenant Washington," she said, recognizing him immediately. "Just wanted to let you know your left brake light is flickering. Intermittently. Not completely out, but might need attention soon." "Thank you, officer," Marcus replied, the interaction surreal in its normalcy after all he had experienced. "I'll get that checked today." "Appreciate it. Have a good day, sir." She returned to her vehicle without unnecessary scrutiny or intimidation. The encounter was brief and unremarkable, exactly what any traffic stop should be, regardless of the driver's race. While a single positive interaction couldn't erase the trauma of past experiences, it represented the possibility of change, of systems functioning as they should, rather than as instruments of discrimination. At the advisory meeting, Marcus joined a diverse group of community representatives working with department leadership on ongoing reforms. There were tense moments and disagreements about priorities, but the fundamental commitment to collaborative improvement remained intact. New policies on traffic stops, use of force and complaint procedures incorporated community input and emphasized accountability. After the meeting, Marcus met with several young officers in a mentoring program designed to help them understand the community's perspective and history. They listened attentively as he shared his experiences, neither defensive nor dismissive. Their questions reflected genuine desire to serve effectively across cultural differences. These officers represented hope for a transformed department culture, one that distinguished between upholding the law and enforcing social hierarchies. That evening, the Washington family hosted a small gathering of those who had stood with them through their ordeal. Michael Jenkins and the other veterans who had formed their support network. Samuel Thompson, whose lifetime of community building had created the foundation for their resistance. Officer Garcia, who had risked her career to provide crucial testimony. Attorney Chen, whose legal expertise had translated their experiences into actionable cases. Diane Winters, whose reporting had brought national attention to local injustice. As they shared a meal and reflected on the changes of the past year, the conversation turned to the future. The reforms already implemented were significant but fragile. Without continued vigilance, old patterns could re-emerge under new leadership or different terminology. "This isn't a victory we can celebrate and move on from," Marcus observed. "It's a responsibility we carry forward. The systems didn't become discriminatory overnight, and they won't be transformed that quickly either. But we've created a model," Chen noted. "What happened here in Riverview is being studied by civil rights attorneys nationwide. The combination of legal action, media attention, community organization, and federal intervention provides a template for addressing similar situations elsewhere." The conversation continued late into the evening, balancing recognition of progress with acknowledgement of continuing challenges. There was no illusion of perfect justice or complete resolution, but rather a sober commitment to persistent engagement with difficult realities. Later, after their guests had departed, Marcus stood on the back porch watching the moonlight on. Their yard, where Zora's swing set, stood alongside the barbecue grill, where he had once imagined peaceful family gatherings upon his return from deployment. Those simple dreams had been interrupted by the harsh realities of discrimination, yet something new and perhaps more meaningful had emerged from that painful disruption, a purpose that extended beyond personal comfort to community transformation. Ayana joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about so intensely out here?" "About costs and values," he replied. "What we've lost and what we've gained, whether it was worth it." "Was it?" she asked, though they both knew there was no simple answer. Marcus considered the question carefully. They had lost their sense of security, experienced trauma that would never completely heal, and faced hatred they hadn't anticipated. Yet they had also been part of catalyzing necessary change, creating possibilities for greater justice, not just for themselves, but for an entire community. "I think we'll be answering that question for the rest of our lives," he finally responded. "But I know I couldn't have lived with myself if we'd surrendered to intimidation. What happened here was never just about us." The following morning, Marcus drove Zora to school, their usual routine now feeling precious rather than mundane after all they had experienced. As they approached a traffic light, a police cruiser pulled alongside them. Zora tensed slightly, a conditioned response to potential threat. The officer glanced over, recognized Marcus, and offered a respectful nod before continuing on his way when the light changed. A small gesture, unremarkable in most contexts, but significant in Riverview. "That was different, wasn't it, Daddy?" Zora observed, her perceptiveness both impressive and poignant. "Yes, it was," Marcus agreed. "That's what we've been working for, not special treatment, just normal respect." "Will it stay that way?" she asked, the question reflecting wisdom beyond her years. Marcus considered how to answer honestly, without burdening his daughter with adult cynicism. "That depends on all of us," he said finally, "on whether enough people care about fairness to keep working for it even when it's difficult. Change takes time and commitment." Zora nodded thoughtfully. "Like your medals," she said, surprising him with the connection. "You didn't get them for doing one brave thing. You got them for being brave every day, even when it was hard." Her understanding gave Marcus renewed hope. If his daughter could grasp this fundamental truth at her young age, perhaps the next generation would build upon the difficult progress of their parents, continuing the long journey toward true equality and justice. As they arrived at school, Zora gathered her backpack. Before leaving the car, she leaned over and hugged her father tightly. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she whispered, even when it was scary. Those simple words, offered without rehearsal or calculation, represented the most meaningful validation Marcus had received through all the public recognition and legal vindication. His daughter had witnessed both his vulnerability and his resolve, his suffering and his principled response. The example he had set would shape her understanding of courage and integrity throughout her life. Watching Zora join her classmates in the schoolyard, Marcus felt the complex mixture of emotions that had become familiar: pride in what they had accomplished, sorrow for the innocence lost, and determination to continue the work of transformation. There would be setbacks and new challenges ahead, both personal and societal. The arc of justice might bend toward equality, but only through the sustained effort of those willing to stand against established power when necessary. As Marcus drove away, he passed a newly installed billboard near the school. Riverview, moving. Forward together. The slogan was optimistic, perhaps prematurely so, but it represented an aspiration worth pursuing despite the difficult realities of the present. He thought of all those who had stood with his family in their darkest moments. The Veterans Network, community leaders, whistleblowers within the system, ordinary citizens who had chosen principle over comfort. Their collective resistance had created space for possibility where none had seemed to exist. Though perfect justice remained elusive, the community had begun a genuine reckoning with its past and present. For Marcus Washington, that painful but necessary process represented both a personal vindication and a contribution to the larger struggle for equality that had defined American history from its inception. The future remained uncertain, the work unfinished. But driving through the streets of his hometown on this ordinary morning, Marcus felt something that had been absent since his return from deployment. Hope, not as naive optimism, but as reasoned commitment to continued progress. It was enough to sustain him for the journey ahead. Marcus Washington's story teaches us that confronting systemic discrimination requires both courage and strategic persistence. The path to justice is rarely straightforward, often involving devastating setbacks and personal sacrifices. Yet individual actions, when combined with community solidarity and legal advocacy, can challenge entrenched power structures. True change demands more than exposing individual bad actors. It requires transforming the systems that enable discrimination to flourish. The most powerful resistance comes not from seeking vengeance, but from pursuing accountability while maintaining dignity. For communities facing discrimination, documentation, alliance building, and strategic escalation provide the foundation for meaningful reform. While perfect justice may remain elusive, the commitment to equality creates possibilities for future generations. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that silence and comfort in the face of injustice only preserves the status quo. Real change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept discrimination as inevitable, standing firmly for the principle that every person deserves equal treatment under the law. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination and found yourself at a crossroads, wondering whether to speak up or stay silent? Comment below with your thoughts on what gives people the courage to stand against injustice, even when it comes at a personal cost. If you believe stories like Marcus Washington's need to be shared more widely, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that explores the challenging realities of discrimination in America. Share this with someone whose perspective might be changed by walking in another person's shoes. Thank you for joining us in this difficult but necessary conversation about race, power, and the ongoing struggle for equality. Remember, change begins with awareness, but it's sustained through action.